I really appreciate that you all are here today. You could have chose to be somewhere else, but you chose to be in the house of the Lord today. And that means that we have a hunger for God. I really do hope that we have a hunger for God. Let me say that again. I really do hope we have a hunger for God. All right. Because where you're going to go with God depends very much on how much you hunger and thirst for Him. And when it all boils down to, it comes down to your personal relationship with Him. The preachers, teachers, they are there for one purpose, and that's to edify the saints for the work of the ministry. In keeping with the book of Genesis, if you can, turn to Genesis chapter 28, and we'll read from verse 11. I'm reading from the NIV. It reads, "When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, which had stopped reaching to heaven, and the angels of God was ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are laying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." And I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. We're going to look at this one character today. We're going to look at Jacob. Now, Jacob was the grandson of Abraham and the son of Isaac. He had a brother named Esau. And Jacob, no matter he was a second child, he was not settled with being less. He wanted to be blessed. And in his desire to be blessed, he cheated. He did a shameful thing. He fooled his father and robbed his brother, because he believed, according to his culture, that if he got his father's blessing, that the rest of his life would be blessed. But if his brother got that blessing, then he would have settled for second hand. And that was not good enough for Jacob. You know, we need to have some people with the same desire like Jacob, that will not settle for less. Yes, life is a struggle, and Jacob represents struggle. His life, when you read through it, the way he had to get his wives, the way he had to get his flocks, was always a struggle. But he never settled for less. What I have learned in this short course of life that I've had, that if I lay down and don't get up, I would stay down. But if I get up, God will be with me to accomplish whatever I do. Now, Jacob, after he cheated his brother was determined to kill him. Now that's a situation. Here is a mother's boy, and Jacob was really truly a mother's boy. He spent his time in the kitchen. He spent his time in the household. He did not know about fighting and hunting like Esau. The only blood he probably saw was probably killing a chicken. But his brother was a tough guy. His brother was a bold guy. And his brother was out for vengeance. So his mother decided to have him run away, to send him off. And the send-off was not like a pleasant send-off. You know, parents, they long to see their children grow up, educate them, they get married, and you send them off. And Jacob came from such a stable home. That is how it should have been for Jacob. But what did Jacob get? Jacob didn't get the nice send-off. There are many people in our society, before they reach 18, or sometime as they reach 18, they are told you have to find your own and get out. That is what Jacob was faced with. But worse yet, Jacob didn't have a career. Jacob didn't have an education. Jacob didn't have a skill. And he was running, and he was going back to a place that his clan had left. So he was not progressing. He was going backwards. And then he came to a city called Luz. Now Luz was like every other city of its time. Ungodly, violent. If you're a stranger, it's good to be fearful, because your life could be lost. Your blood could be shed. So Jacob decided to sleep on a hill. Not just a hill, but a stony hill. Sometimes in our lives we find ourselves in those places. We find a place where it's hard, where it's lonely, and where it's dark. And the only thing he could comfort himself on was not the soft ground. He took a rock. Now that tells us something about his mental state. It tells us that he was lonely. It tells us that he was confused. It tells us that he probably was feeling guilty for what he has done. He had no self-confidence. And the only comfort he could find was to lay his head on a rock. People who are depressed, they tend to want to just lock away. And they sometimes want to punish themselves. They sometimes want to force pain upon themselves. Maybe that is what that rock did on Jacob's head. But he fell asleep. He fell asleep. And then something happened. And that is where our theme is, Jacob's ladder. We're going to look at what Jacob's ladder is all about. Jacob in his dream, as we read, saw the heavens open and angels descending and ascending. It is the first time in all of the history of man had anyone saw heaven. It's recorded in Genesis 28. In Jewish culture, it is very significant, Jacob's ladder, because it was at that exact spot that later on they built their temple there. Jacob's ladder represents to the people of Israel a hope for the hopeless. What does it mean? Jacob was praying. While he was running, he was praying. I'm sure enough that when we are in trouble, that is when we seek God. In my few years at church, I've realized people come to church, but they don't necessarily find God in church. They normally find God when they're in financial problems, when they lost their jobs, when they're probably sick, when they probably get a broken heart. That's when they tend to find God. In the midst of their loneliness, they begin to cry out to God. And the vision that Jacob had was that God decided to show Jacob exactly what takes place in the spiritual realm. God decided to show Jacob, I will show you when you pray, angels take your prayers and they bring them up to me. And I hear and I answer. God answered Jacob that day. He answered him against all his fears. He comforted him in a way that only Jacob could understand. And I want to tell you what it is exactly that he told Jacob. In verse 13 he said, I will give you this land. In verse 14 he says, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. And again in verse 14 he said, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. In verse 15 he says, I will watch over you wherever you go. Again in verse 15 he says, I will bring you back to this land. And lastly, in verse 15 he assures him, I will not leave you. What does that mean to a desperate man like Jacob? You see, God may have spoken to Jacob, but somehow he speaks to a multitude of people. One thing God has said, but it's like 1,000 things to the ears that would hear. What does it mean? First, Jacob had to deal with shame. So God reminds him, I am the God of Abraham. When in tradition he sinned, he did his brother wrong, he offended his grandfather's word. That's a shameful thing. We in our culture, in some parts of our culture, we don't really hold to the tradition of respecting our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers. But back then, that was very significant. So Jacob was facing shame. And God now reminded him that, hey, no matter what you have done, you're still Abraham's child. Then he goes on to say, I am the God of Isaac. What did Jacob do Isaac? He betrayed Isaac's trust. He schemed his father. But God is reassuring him that you're still Isaac's son. Then he was in a lost place. And God says, I will give you this land. In other words, Jacob had lost home. He was no longer home. And God is saying, I will give you a home. Then he had lost significant value in life. And God says to him, all people of the earth will be blessed through you. Wouldn't that be wonderful to know that God sees you as significant? Jacob in his low could not believe that he was significant. He was running. He was homeless. He was broken. And God comes and tells him, all the nations, not your clan, not your neighbors, but all the nations will be blessed because of you. And then God reassures him, you may be familyless, but you will have descendants. Your brother will not kill you. You will have children. And then God tells him not to fear. I will be with you. Not to fear. I will be with you. Whatever, whenever we go through our troubles, we have to be assured that God will be with us. It's not a second thought. It must be your first thought that God will be with me. So, in getting up, Jacob's scheme of thoughts was changed. And he got up and he said, surely God has been in this place. While as a child, Jacob did not have a personal God. He had a culture, he had a religion, he had a practice, and he had a custom. But on this vision, he now had a personal God. Pastor Kirby, come. I am down. I want you to come and pick me up. Help me to get up. I'm down. I want you to hold me. This is what God did for Jacob. God holds you. Jacob, when he schemed his brother, he thought, how many of you all could remember the old time clocks that you have to wind and wind and wind and wind? He thought that is how God had done with the earth and all of mankind's life. He winded up, started up, and life began ticking. Tick, 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 tick. Time began to pass. And he was finished with it, and now he was somewhere singing about the universe. But on that day, God became personal, and he realized that God was concerned with his life. Are you assured that God is concerned with your life? Are you confident enough to say that God is with you through the fires and through the floods, and that no weapon formed against you shall prosper? Are you assured in your spirit? Is your faith at the place where it would leap, where fear would try to sink you down? These are questions that we all must answer. Unless you answer those questions, your life with God will not go deeper. Unless you are assured of your God, of my God, you will not have victory. It's not a hit and bless. I believe that the hit and bless was first time when the world needed to see the demonstration of the power of God. But now the world needs to see the demonstration of the church. You are the church. I am the church. We are the people of God with the power of God. What keeps us back is emotional pain and suffering, struggles. That is what kept Jacob back. But the minute Jacob realized that God was with him, he got up and he did something. He made an altar. Instead of worrying, instead of crying, instead of coming every day for someone to lay their hands on you, I challenge you to make an altar. One of the significant things about the Jacob's ladder is that Jesus himself decided to refer to himself as Jacob's ladder. In John verses 1:46 to 52, and I will narrate to you what happened. Philip found Jesus and decided to tell his friend Nathanael, "Come see." And Nathanael asked, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Now, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth." Now, truth is something, it's just the truth. There is no ifs about the truth. Jesus says, "I tell you the truth. You will see heaven open, and the angels of God descending and ascending on the Son of Man." So Jesus decided it was fitting to place himself as Jacob's ladder. What does that mean? Some people have interpreted as a saying, well, it simply means that the Son of God has came down to meet the sons of men and take the sons of men and make them the sons of God. But it goes further than that. Where was this Jacob's ladder? This Jacob's ladder was in the city of Luz, a place of no good. Nazareth, a place of no good. Now, when Jacob had his vision, he named the place over the Bethel. Bethel means new beginning. Our lives, my life, when it came to Christ, it got a new beginning. That is what Jesus was saying. I am the one that will give anyone who would come to me a new beginning. Life will hurt you. Life will make you feel destitute. Life will be unfair. Life will pose struggles. When life is finished with you, you may want to throw away your life. But when you come to the one that is life, he will take you and give you a new beginning. That is why he could have said to himself, I am. And he referred to himself as Jacob's ladder. It is the place of new beginning. With Christ, every day is a new day. The Christian life is not a bored life. It's a challenging life. The Christian life is a life with anointing, gifting, purpose, power, overcoming, triumphing. It's a life worth living. It's a life where God is your friend and you are a friend of God. Not just any God, but the God that created the world and all that dwell therein. Recently I was blogging with an anti-Christian. Do you know there are Christians that are anti-Christian? They have a different gospel. And he posed this question to me. He said, God is a bloody God. He passed judgment. He imposes himself on the human race and makes a demand. And when we don't owe up to it, he punishes. Is that the God that you serve? I stop and I thought, and I say, why God may do these things? He may be God of justice. Everything belongs to him. So who am I to tell him what to do? Who am I to tell him how to behave? It is he that must instruct me on how to behave. And that brings us to another point about Jacob's ladder. It's a place of grace. I wondered what would have happened if God had decided to criticize, to judge, to condemn Jacob for what he had done. Jacob could have been killed right outside Luz. That very night, men could have ambushed him, buried him, and we never hear about him. But the God is a God of grace. Which brings me to the point. Do we show grace to our brethren when they fall? The church is a place where we're not supposed to be burying our wounded soldiers. We're not supposed to be mouthing them. People behave differently. Some people can take criticism, some people can't. We need to season our words with kindness and love. I try. But sometimes my own tongue deceives me. But you know what? It's not hard to say sorry. My friends, and I call you friends, because we have one spirit. And that's the spirit of being true to Jesus Christ. He's the one that will use us. Yes, he will use you. And you can expect him to use you to do the miraculous, as also to do the simple. Because he needs you to touch others. What did he bless Jacob with? That was Jacob's purpose. Through you, the nations of the world will be blessed. Remember I said, one thing God has spoken, but 1,000 ears must hear. He said it to Jacob, he said it to you. You are a blessing. I am a blessing to the world. Maybe you are in a point where Jacob was before he encountered God. Feeling insignificant, feeling downtrodden, feeling ashamed, depressed. But God don't see you like that. God never saw you like that. You need to look into the eyes of Jesus. When he hung on that cross and he says, it's finished. I read one woman account where She was very ashamed of what she did. And as she was praying, she envisioned Jesus' eyes staring at her. And being lost in his love, she realized that his love covers a multitude of whatever sins that anyone can do. I want to tell you the same thing. His blood washes you clean from sin. It cleanses you. And his love is enough for you to be strong to go on each day and every day. His Spirit, the Holy Spirit, is with us to do that work, to be a blessing to the whole world, to your neighbors, to your friends, to your co-workers, and even to your enemies. All you have to do is, like Jacob, get up from that place, turn that place around to a place where you make it your altar and you thank God and you praise God. In closing, I'd like to say a few things. We all will have a Jacob experience. Let me say it again. We all will have a Jacob experience. 1, we feel down. 2, we meet God. Secondly, what you do out of that experience will determine how close you get to God. Thirdly, whenever we feel that life is too much for us, God's expectation for you, for us, is greater than what the circumstances.